Hello, class, and welcome to today's reading and writing about literature review. So, the section on the writing process, page 25, right? We'll pick up there with the idea of pre-writing and choosing a topic. As we spoke about, or as I spoke about in the video review of the Writing Logically, Thinking Critically readings, for this next essay, you're going to take your 2F. You're going to take all your facts and examples and details from the story of an hour that you wrote down in your pre-writing, whether that's a brainstorming or a free writing, whether you jotted those ideas down in list form or you started writing sentences out like a journal entry. You're going to start organizing those ideas according to the elements of fiction: plot, character, setting, style, symbolism, theme, right? And think about character, right? Think about how, because essentially it's a character analysis, how those facts, details, and examples from the story are going to work to prove your inference that she did die of literal joy, ironic joy, or metaphorical joy. And your inference becomes your thesis. And essentially on pages 26 to 27, right, it discusses developing the argument and formulating the thesis. Your thesis should be clear and specific. Answer the question: Mrs. Mallard did or did not die of joy because, and then put an adjective before it: literal joy, metaphorical joy, symbolic joy, ironic joy. It should be relevant. It should relate to the topic. Obviously, the assignment is the prompt for 2F. Essentially, no one is going to agree 100% on the ending because literature is implicit, right? So make sure your thesis, the third bullet point in the book says, make sure it's debatable. Leave the possibility that other interpretations may exist. Don't say my interpretation is 100% right 100% of the time. The next bullet point on the top of 28, it should be original, right? Again, don't consult with outside sources until after you've done your pre-writing and your outline. We're going to talk about getting sources later in future classes. So for now, your thesis should be original. It shouldn't be what someone else has said. Focus on, I want your interpretation. You should be able to state it as a complete sentence. It should be stated in strong, unambiguous language. Ambiguous means unclear. It should be clear and it should be appropriate to the assignment. The last bullet point on page 28, make sure it relates to the prompt. You have numerous example thesis statements on page 29 and 30. And then as you're moving forward, it talks about gathering support for the thesis. And we have 3 bullet points on page 30 that I'd like you to draw your attention to. The details from the story. Bullet number 1, the text itself is the most obvious source of support. Focus on the text itself for now. Your pre-writing, your 2F, should focus on the text itself. And then we'll discuss in the future using the MiraCosta library database or the internet to get secondary sources. But make sure your own thoughts are your most important source of support. Your 2F, that's why 2F is so important. That's what the third bullet on page 30 tells us. Now, you have a sample outline on 31 to 32, and that's what we'll work on this week, is outlining and drafting the essay. We'll work on that in the next few classes. But you could see how they start with the thesis and then list out those supporting ideas, which elements of fiction you're going to focus on, which details, which examples, which descriptions. And then as you're drafting the essay, focus on the advice on pages 34 and 35 with regard to constructing the intro, constructing the body paragraphs, constructing the transitions. So hopefully this reading was helpful as you begin to think about writing the paper. Please turn with me to page 63 and let's discuss the section on analysis. To analyze, by definition, is to take something apart and examine how the individual parts relate to one another and function within the whole. Engineers frequently analyze complex machinery looking for ways to improve efficiency or performance. In a similar way, notice the analogy. You can take apart a piece of literature to study how a particular part of it functions and what the part contributes to the whole. Typical candidates for literary analysis include plot development, characterization, tone, irony, and symbols. And those ideas are more specifically described in pages 76 to 79 in the section Writing About Stories. Please turn to page 76 and let's go over the elements of fiction together. Again, take your ideas, right, from your 2F and start organizing them. Which ones fit under plot? Well, when you read the paragraph on 76 as to what to focus on with plot, it's very specific in that you focus on the facts. What happens? And why is what happens important? So you might think about giving a brief plot overview and analyzing why what happens is important. And I think plot plays a very big role in this story, as in all stories, but specifically what happens at the beginning and the ending. It leads to our 2F question. Character. Whenever you're analyzing a character in the story or a speaker in a poem or a character or a speaker in a play, ask yourself, what are their actions? What are their motivations? And what about development? You want to analyze those three things. The beautiful thing about pages 76 to 79 is whatever element you're going to focus on, there's a nice, well-developed paragraph that tells you what the element is, how to focus on it, and then they give you an example. So literally, the first sentence of character says, many interesting essays analyze the actions, motivations, and development of individual characters. Fair enough. That's what you're going to want to do in this essay. You're analyzing Louise Mallard. Point of view, the perspective. Now remember, do not confuse the authors and the characters. The characters, right, are the speakers in the narration, right? In the stories, in the narrating of the story, in the narration, right? Chopin wrote it, but aside from giving some background maybe on her as an author, you want to focus on what the characters do, think, feel, and say, and from what point of view that information is presented. Is it objective, meaning just the facts, right? A first person objective narrator, or is the narrator omniscient? Omniscient, meaning all knowing. Do they tell us what the characters are thinking and feeling? Or is it just the facts? So an objective narrator, right, just tells the facts, but the omniscient point of view, we get inside the characters' thoughts and they tell us what they're thinking. Much like Hamlet during his asides in Act 1, during his soliloquy in Act 1, where he tells us how he really feels when everybody else is off the stage. So point of view plays a big role. Setting, time, place, and milieu. You'll notice the word milieu, right, is on the fourth line. Is the perfect milieu for an exploration of values and class interaction. Milieu is the cultural, social, and political setting of the time in which the story was written and or takes place. Theme, right? All short stories have at least one theme, an abstract concept. What are some possible themes for this essay? Joy, happiness, love, marriage, codependence, independence, autonomy, self-assertion, femininity, right? There's a lot of possible themes, identity, that you could explore in your analysis of the story of an hour. Symbolism. Look for symbolic words, objects, ideas. Symbolism is when things are not literal. They stand for something else. Yes, the window is open in the room and she looks out it. Literally, we open windows to get in air and light. So is the open window in her room when Mrs. Mallard goes upstairs to get in, to let in air and light, or is it an open window of possibilities, metaphorical? Is it symbolical for something else? Same with the new spring life. Is it literally new spring life outside the window, or is she too experiencing a rebirth, much like nature does in spring? Last, but certainly not least, and perhaps of the most importance, is style. On page 78, it very clearly describes when you analyze style, you focus on word choice, connotations of word choice. Connotation is emotional associations. When you look at a word, the denotation is the dictionary definition. The connotation is the emotional associations. Are the words positive? Are negative? Are they conjuring up appeals to emotion? Is the author using figures of speech for emphasis? Yes. Chopin uses lots of figures of speech. With style, in addition to word choice, you're also going to look at punctuation, right? And things of that nature. So, word choice, figures of speech, emotional associations of words, uh, punctuation, tone, right? Um, and things of that nature. When we talk about word choice, the fancy word we use is diction. So examine diction, examine punctuation, and look for figures of speech and tone instances when analyzing style. Thank you for your patience. Stay tuned. More to come.